clock is ticking. The hunt is on. Two strangers are locked in a deadly race to find you. One is a billionaire with more money than he can ever spend. The other is a ruthless killer with nothing to lose. One of them will change your life. The other will stop at nothing to end it. But who will find you first?
So let's get started. Our first question is from Glynis McAvoy, who wants to know if I have considered writing a book which is set in the UK. That's a good question. I haven't as yet set a book there, and I don't know if I will or not. Actually, a few years ago, I was working on a screenplay version of one of my books, and the original novel had taken place in America. But the producers who were making this possible TV series, which never did happen, but that's another story, had wanted to set it between sort of England and Paris. So the only time I've really written anything that was sort of based in UK was that screenplay. I mean, I live in Toronto. I'm talking to you right now from Toronto in Canada, looking at all the snow coming down. But I've been to London and throughout, the UK and so forth many times, more than I could count. So I feel confident that I could certainly set scenes and set some things there. But I think to set a story in another country, do the whole thing, you really need to spend a lot of time there to get a sense of things, to the sort of things that you only really learn by living there for a while, like, certain names for certain kinds of food, or some street that nobody ever calls by the actual street name. They call it something else. And those are the kinds of things that you pick up by living in a place for a long time. And I've read books by other authors who set some scenes in Toronto, and I read them and I think, yeah, they've never been here. Because there are just things that they don't get quite right. So if I ever were to set one in the UK, I would certainly be very much depending on the help of some very, very smart editors who do live there, who could catch out my mistakes. Tammy Wilkes has a question about sort of how I go about what I do. I was wondering if there is a specific time of the day when I write. So writing to me is a job, and you get up in the morning and you go to work. And I worked 30 years in newspapers, so writing wasn't one of those things where you think, well, I think I'll write after midnight, or I'll do one of these bizarre things and get up at 4 in the morning or whatever. I get up at I'm up early in the morning and I have breakfast, and I'm usually in my study in the house here by between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning, when I am in the thick of writing a book. And so I usually start, in the morning around then, and I go until about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, with lots of probably interruptions and breaks in between. The goal for me is to get a certain number of words done on any given day. And I like to get about 2,000 words done per day. And the way I look at that is, if you can get roughly 2,000 words done a day, that's 10,000 words in a week. A book is around 100,000 words. So in about 2.5 to 3 months, you've got yourself a first draft. So I like to kind of stay on that kind of a schedule for getting things done. So yeah, I kind of work in regular hours, but like I say, usually around 2:30 or 3, my wife Nitho downstairs will call up and say that it is vodka o'clock, which is kind of like when the whistle blows at a factory and everybody's shift is over. So, but that's usually kind of when I finish. But I like to be able to finish in a way that I sort of know where I'll pick up and start the following morning. I work Monday to Friday. I most of the times take Saturday and Sunday off. However, if I'm really close to the end of a book and it's really going well, sometimes I will do some work on the weekend just to see it get finished. A question from Louise Fligman that's very much of the moment that we're living through at this time with the pandemic, and I'm wondering if I have an idea, I've got an idea through lockdown or whatever that would inspire a future book. This is a question I've been getting a lot of, and I think a lot of authors are getting this question. Are you going to write a pandemic book? Do you want to, are you going to write something about the lockdown and so forth? And I'm not saying I never would, but I would imagine also that there are about 1,000 other authors who are also debating whether to do a lockdown pandemic book. So the question is going to be, who's going to get one out first, and how many of them do you want to read? If 30, 40 authors decide to do a pandemic book, how many of them do you really want to read? And does anybody want to read any of them? Because this is something that we would all like to be over with. And once it is, how much do we want to be reminded of it? Although I have to say, early in the pandemic, I watched the Steven Soderbergh movie Contagion again, having seen it originally a few years ago. And that was pretty interesting because it was how close it was to what we've been going through. And I also felt at the time that everyone should be forced to watch the movie Contagion, because then maybe they realize maybe we should be more careful. Maybe we should be wearing a mask. And the other thing, a couple other points on this is that, first of all, the Great Pandemic novel was written around 1979. It was written by Stephen King, and it was called The Stand, and it's going to be very hard to top that. However, how will it influence what we do? I think that it's the sort of thing that, like, I've just written the book that will come out and have delivered the book that will come out in 2022. I've said it in 2022. So I feel I needed to reference it. So my character finds maybe there's an old mask down next to the car seat, or a pair of latex gloves, or hand sanitizer. So there's a reference that it happened, because I don't think that in books that are set after 2020 or 2021, I don't think we can ignore, pretend it didn't happen. So it's referenced. And we'll also have to think, well, what are our characters going to do? Are they going to, are they going to go to a restaurant? Are they going to go to a bar? Are they going to shake hands? So those are the kinds of things that I think will have an impact on what I might write in the future. Either that, or we're all going to just set our books in 2019 and pretend none of this ever happened. If only we could do that. Now, Kristen Kielteka, I hope I pronounced that right. She would like to know how many unpublished books I have. It's interesting what time period you look at. Since I started writing professionally, like getting books published, I have written one entire novel that I just put away. So this is going back to around 2008, 2009. And I had a big hit come out with a book called No Time for Goodbye, and another book that came out after called Too Close to Home. And I was writing what would be the next book. And I'm still sort of new at this. And I wrote this entire novel, and I kept thinking that there were problems, but I would fix them later. And then I gave it to my agent to read, and she said to me, "What a holy mess this is." She said, "Knowing how quickly you write, you could write another book from scratch in less time than it would take to fix all the things that are wrong with this book." And she was right. She said, "This book is publishable, but given that you've had a big hit like No Time for Goodbye and so forth, you really can't afford to go out there with a book that's just barely okay." And she was right. And so I thought about stepping in front of a bus for a few days, and then decided, nope, I'll just have to get back to work. And there was another novel I was thinking about doing, and I wrote that in kind of a panic because I had to deliver, I had a deadline to meet. And that book became a novel called Fear the Worst, which is actually one of my favorites. And I don't feel badly about this book not getting published, because it was a really good lesson. And that lesson was, when you hear a little voice in the back of your head that says, this is not working, you should stop and figure out whether to continue or what's wrong. So it was a very valuable lesson. I'm never going back to that book. I'm not going to try to fix it. It's done. So that's an unpublished novel. But if we go all the way back to when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I wrote 3 or 4 novels, which I tried to get published and did not. And I'm immensely grateful for the wisdom of the publishers that turned it down, because I would hate for those books to be sitting around somewhere now. People could say, wow, these are just terrible. So there's a few of those that are unpublished, and they're not going to see the light of day either. Our last question is from Anne Martin, whose own favorite book as a child was The Secret Garden. And she wants to know what was my favorite book, I guess, when I was younger, and if it inspired me to become a writer. Well, and first of all, I don't think it was any one book that inspired me to become a writer. I have to admit, and I have to confess, that it was television that made me want to become a writer. When I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I had these favorite TV shows that I loved so much. This is back in the 60s, and an episode a week wasn't enough for me. So I would write my own adventures based on characters created by others, like, based on The Man from Uncle or Mission Impossible, shows like that. And by the time I was, 11, I was asking my dad to teach me how to type so that I could crank these things out more quickly. And I was writing 30, 40-page novellas based on those shows. But there were a lot of books that I devoured when I was young, the Agatha Christie's novel books, the Nero Wolfe novels by Rex Stout. But I think the book that really most made a huge impression on me, I discovered when I was 15 years old on one of these squeaky metal paperback racks at my local grocery store, was a Bantam paperback edition of a novel called The Goodbye Look by Ross MacDonald. It was one of his Lou Archer mysteries. And there was something about that book that I just loved it so much. And then went and found everything I could find by Ross MacDonald. And that reading him was a kind of turning point because, and I don't even know if I appreciated it at the time, but what MacDonald taught me was that you could use the conventions of a mystery novel and use it to do other things, to explore other issues, to look at environmentalism or the corruption, wealth and family dysfunction. And those books really made a huge impression on me, to the point that when I got to university, I wanted to do a big thesis on crime fiction, looking largely at those novels by Ross MacDonald, which led me to having a correspondence with him and ultimately at the age of 21, having dinner with him when he was on a trip to Canada. So I would say that the Goodbye Look, that's the book that really made an impression on me. And I thought at the time, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a guy who's cranking out a really good thriller one a year, just like Ross MacDonald does. So I think that would be the book.